So operational is different. We'll get that in a second. But how are your actual assisted living facilities different themselves? You're saying you're kind of disrupting the industry. How are you doing that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing to think about is, how many stories do you picture an assisted living in your head? If I say assisted living, what do you think?
Yeah, 3-4 stories, kind of a big box building. Maybe a pool, a campus, a restaurant, something like that. I don't know, Garrett. What do you think? Right?
I think of one.
Yeah, ideally you'd think of one. But a lot of places have mid-rise facilities like what Michael's describing. If we ask the average person what assisted living thinks about, they often picture a nursing home. Right. Sometimes they picture what Michael was talking about. You absolutely, like to Garrett's point, you want to be horizontal, not vertical. So what we do is we build all horizontally. So none of our buildings have stairs or elevators for the residents, which that's not that disruptive. But the difference is that instead of having one building for 160 residents, we'll have 10 buildings that house 16 residents in them. We'll get the same number of residents in terms of the scaling. We'll have 10 different licenses we have to apply for as opposed to one. What that means is now we have a boutique experience for the residents. And so now people can segregate or congregate in much smaller settings. So what we've done is we've taken the residential assisted living model that you're probably familiar with. We've taken the big box model, which Michael described, and we created a permutation of the two. And my friend Steve Moran, who's kind of an influencer in the healthcare industry, has termed us investment grade REL. And so that's really what we think about ourselves. We call ourselves a planned care home community, kind of a campus of care homes. And it solves a lot of the scaling problems of residential assisted living, but then you get the same outcome advantages that you get over the big box that you were describing, Michael.
What are some of the scaling problems of residential? First of all, define residential assisted living and then talk about what the scaling problems are.
Sure. So, first thing is just to be brief for your audience. There's quite a few things when people say the word senior housing. So if you read a Wall Street Journal article about senior housing, they could be talking about a lot of different things. It can be very confusing. So first off, you have independent living. That just basically means that it's a housing situation, but there's no care being delivered. There are subsets of that. For the purpose of our conversation today, we'll call that independent living, also called IL. Pretty basic. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have skilled nursing, also called SNF. These are people that have complex medical conditions that need massive oversight. They have nursing oversight, often have a medical director in the facility. Our good friend in common, Victor Menashe, calls them hospitals with a better paint job. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. We're kind of in the middle. So assisted living and memory care help people out both on a hospitality side, but also on a healthcare side. And we're less care than a skilled nursing environment, but we're more care than an independent living facility. So the basic difference, assisted living, generally you have mobility challenges, mobility impairments. In the dementia care, memory care side, you have cognitive impairments. And that can also include things like Parkinson's or other things that might cause you to have poor memory or impulse control. So we focus on the assisted living and the memory care aspect of the business. So your original question, REL. So REL stands for residential assisted living. It goes by a few different names. I like to think about it as sort of small assisted living and memory care facilities. And so really the war between the two sides is really on sizing, small versus large. Do you want to be in a large place? You want to be in a small place? Well, the problem with residential assisted living, in my opinion, there's almost no question that it produces better outcomes. When you're in a group of 10 people versus a group of 100 people, you're almost always going to get more attention. You're going to fall less. The food quality is going to be better. The space is going to be more easy to navigate. So you got mobility challenges. You have less long hallways. There's tons of advantages. But the scaling problems are numerous. So the first is there's almost no third-party management in REL. You have to be the operator owner yourself, whereas in most other businesses, you can hire a third-party management company. I know you guys know way more about that than I do in your line of work. So you have to manage it yourself. Well, let's say you're a successful person and you want to add a care home to your portfolio. Well, now you got to do a lot of work to get that open because you can't really hire a third-party management company to do that for you. So you have to have a portfolio to solve that problem. The other really big problem that nobody really talks about, if you were going to call a bank, if you were to call JP Morgan Chase right now, hey, JP Morgan Chase, you're a big bank. I want to finance my residential assisted living facility. They're like, what are you talking about? Well, what is that? They wouldn't know to send you the commercial department or the residential department. If you hire an appraiser, if you're converting a single family home, let's say you find a mansion somewhere and you want to convert it into an 8, 10, 15 bed facility. Are they appraising it as a single family home? If they're appraising it after construction, how do they appraise that? So it creates all these problems and challenges. Those problems don't exist in big buildings because they have a very clear specific use. So when you turn these things into a campus, then they appraise on, and they're on commercial land, then they're appraising like any other assisted living and memory care facility would. You have all the outcome advantages of smaller buildings, but you have all the scaling advantages like transportation, executive director with an activities coordinator and social work. You have all the things that you have in the big buildings, except instead of having one building for 160, we have 10 buildings for 16.
So this is super interesting, but something led you to this discovery. What were you doing before this that kind of teed you into this unique proposition?
Well, in my case, those are two very different questions. So what was I doing before this, or what led me to this business?
I guess a bit of both.
Yeah. So, I mean, my career path is a very traditional assisted living and memory care one. I worked in a car dealership. I was selling extended warranties on Hondas. And then I decided I wanted to take care of people with dementia. It's a very normal career track. Totally makes sense, right? So no, it's funny. If you'd have told me in 2014 or 2013, this is what I would be doing, I would have told you you're crazy. You would have won a wonderfully large size bet from me. My dad got sick, and my dad had a really bad experience on hospice. And he passed away in 2014. And I spent the exact amount of time of the statute of limitations in Louisiana trying to figure out if I wanted to sue the hospice company. And I decided not to. And around the time the statute of limitations was ending, whatever you believe in this particular subject matter, I'm not a particularly religious man, but the universe started pointing me in the direction of, hey, maybe you should help people. And I went to a presentation that was apartment based. They pitched converting into an independent living. So that was kind of the first seed that got planted. Then a week later, I heard a podcast about a gentleman that converts single family houses into assisted living facilities. And I'm like, well, I can do that. I've been in real estate for a long time. You know, I was doing real estate on the side of the dealership. So that felt like bite size to me. And at the time I was engaged. She thought I was crazy. My business partners thought I was crazy. Everyone thought I was nuts. No one believed in me on this business. The only exception is that there was a guy who told me a long time ago that he doesn't look at deals. He bets on jockeys. So he doesn't care about the horse. He said, if you think it's a good idea, I'm going to financially support this business. And he gave me a very generous evaluation on the business. And now we're in the process of building a really strong assisted living and memory care portfolio. So he didn't really think it was a good idea, but he believed in me enough to know that I was going to figure it out. And so I was really inspired by my dad. It was the main reason why I got in the business.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things, and you kind of answered this partially, is that my observation is if you're going to get in this business, you have to have a heart for the business, because it's not just a real estate play. I looked at it and I was like, anything that makes money, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. But it's not just the real estate, and it is not easy to outsource to a third party. You really have to have an interest in the business itself, and you do, right? You actually have a much bigger why. You want to improve the experience for other people that are going through that experience, which is great. Now, for someone that wants to get started in this business, and you talked about some of the scaling business. Yes, a lot of people can wrap their head around a single family house versus doing this at scale. But how does the average person get into the business part of it? Forget the real estate for a second, right? Especially if you're doing it at scale. Now, you described if you're going in there at a house, you're going to be the caretaker. So you have to have some kind of background or interest or passion for it where you're getting into the caretaking itself, or do you align yourself with a partner? In your case, how are you addressing the business of the actual caretaking? Do you have a partner? Do you create a separate company? Like, talk about the caretaking side of that business.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's probably a few answers to your question. So, and I think if you maybe flip it on its head and you were to ask that question, you guys host a fantastic apartment event. I hope to be at it soon. I don't know when the show is being released, but we either just went to the event or we'll be going soon.
And just a few days. Dealmaker Live.
Exactly, Dealmaker Live in Dallas, live. And so, the thing you got to understand is that some people have no business being on the active side in apartments. Fair? That they are successful in their chosen profession, doctors, lawyers, whatever. They know mobile home parks, but they don't want to learn the intricacies of apartment investing. So what do? Is they invest in people that are willing to do that. So obviously one of the ways you can do so is if you believe in the demographics, you believe in the situation. You said you looked into it. Well, the first thing you could do is similar to my friend that I referenced. You could find a jockey, an operator that you want to place a wager on, and you bet on them and you invest in them, and then obviously you're on the limited partner side. I think that's really the best way for people to start in the business. You learn a lot listening to an operator speak through you. Like, imagine all my investors last year, they got a chance to listen to how we were handling COVID and how we did those things. And imagine like if you're in your first year and you're like, oh, COVID, cool. We had no COVID cases in Dallas, something that very few providers can speak to that. We had 100% occupancy going in and never had a single case of COVID amongst our resident staff. We had a small amount in our staff. So I think the LP side is very attractive in this space. If you want to start in the business, there's plenty of companies that'll kind of train you to do that. You obviously don't have to have medical background. I don't have any, but you've got to get into relationships or you got to hire people. I think the thing that everyone really doesn't understand about this business, and I should do a better job talking about, because there's people that have a different narrative that do the same thing that I do. This is a human resources business. So every bed of assisted living that you have, you're going to have a minimum, if you're doing it right, of half an employee to almost a full employee. So if you have 1,000 beds, you're going to have 500 to 800 employees. Now, if you say that to an apartment person, they're like, all right, I'm done, because they're thinking about all they have to deal with. And so it's a human resource company. It's not a systems and process company. Yeah, systems and processes are important in this business, but there are big providers out there that have systems and processes for everything that don't get good outcomes, because the reality is that most of this business is finding people with heart and with talent and getting out of their way and letting them be the executive director and run their community the way they think they should run their community inside ethical, moral, and legal framework. And so all my communities look and feel a little differently because they take on the personality of the leader. And it's so funny. I was having a conversation in Belize with a person that was in the special forces. And I know you guys have a special guest at your apartment deal. And if you think about the military, right, they like train you to be part of this non-thinking machine in a lot of ways until you become in the special forces. And then they're like, yeah, you can grow a beard. We don't care what your hair looks like. You can wear sunglasses. You can grab a enemy combatant weapon and do that. We don't care. Get the job done. And because there's a recognition at some level that processes and systems are amazing up until a point, and then the best thing you can do is not get in the way of a person that has talent and let them do what they do well. So a big part of what our company does is I believe in hiring people for talent and attitude. And so if you're going to partner in this business, you're going to get in this business, then you need to be really good at reading people, really good at figuring out who's got the heart and attitude. Because in a job interview, everybody says the right thing. But if you don't ask those subtle questions to really understand where they're coming from, then you might be able to have people, tell you something that really isn't true, or they'll take a job for a paycheck, not because they have the right heart and attitude. There are a lot easier ways to earn money than taking care of seniors, especially people with dementia or other, there's obviously adults with disabilities and other things. It's difficult work, and you got to have a heart and a passion for it. And so you really want those people that have a greater mission, that are willing to put in the time, that are willing to work overtime, that aren't going to go home until the job is done. And so I like to use that military thing because so many people in this day and age are so obsessed with process and scaling that we often forget that sometimes when you work for a big company, they literally suck the talent out of their people. And you got a checklist for this and a checklist for that. And, and then basically all of Hollywood is basically just movies about people that don't follow processes, right? Like it's just, hey, like that Denzel Washington movie where he was an alcoholic, but he was a really good pilot. Like, he's like, no one could have done that. And they're like, you're right. No one would have flown the plane upside down. And so the point is that I try to basically create systems and processes that kind of create a baseline and create a safety net. But then I really want my key people that I trust to make those decisions. And then if they make a mistake, then let's talk about it and learn from it. And most people in our business don't want that. They want everything to be exactly the same. They want to paint every room exactly the same color so that their maintenance guy knows the paint code. And there's just a point to where that's a very effective way to grow a business, but it's not an effective way to take care of people in my opinion.